Welcome back to Cyber Sea of Galilee, DSMME, on this feast of St. Aloysius Gonzaga. And our Jesuit friends are really celebrating today. This is a beautiful, very young Jesuit saint. He lived in the 16th century. He was born into an aristocratic family, so he had lots of money. His father really hoped that he would become a great soldier. And so at the age of just 4 years old, he began his official training towards being a soldier. And that would have brought him a lot of money, a lot of esteem, a lot of popularity, a lot of glamour and glitz back in those days. But he was an unusual child, and God knew how to get to him because God had another plan for this young boy. When he was just a few years older, he came down with a very sudden, strange kidney disease. And his suffering caused him to have to go to bed for quite a bit. Now, what did he do with his time? Being a young boy, you could think of a lot of things that he might have gotten himself into as much as he possibly could. But instead, he really started asking his mom for books to read about the lives of the saints. Now, he read so much about the lives of the saints that by the time he was able to get up, even though his health was never fully restored, he had already made a determination, and that determination was he was going to give his whole life to God. He was not going to be the soldier that his dad wanted him to. And he knew that he was called to chastity, to really give his entire being, his physical body, as well certainly as his soul, to God himself. And so he went to study and met the Jesuits, and so he went on to Rome and went to the Jesuit seminary there and became a wonderful Jesuit priest. And even as a very young, zealous Jesuit priest, he stood out because he was so forgetful of self. And he had already suffered, so that had already added a dimension of depth to his soul, which others could pick up easily on. And then something unusual happened again. The plague broke out in Europe. And whereas some people refused to get around it and therefore would not care for the people who were victimized by the plague, St. Aloysius went out to them, and as a Jesuit priest, he ministered to them and he gave them the last sacraments, heard the confessions, brought them Holy Communion when he could, possibly whatever he could do for these poor victims. He himself, being again of weakened health and constitution himself, all the way back from his childhood, he quickly got the disease, and he kept pushing as hard as he could until his soul left his body when he was just 23 years old. So I think he is a beautiful, beautiful saint. A lot of young people really find him very attractive because he's their age, and he had already reached the heights of sanctity by the time he was 23 years old. And that's beautiful, and in teaching we really use him because he's a beautiful example, very much like the founder of the Jesuits, who was shot down by a cannonball and ended up finding God laying in a sick bed for many, many months on end, reading the lives of the saints and saying, why can't I be like a St. Francis or a St. Dominic? And so then he began the Jesuits. Years later, we have St. Aloysius following in his footsteps, and his life being very similar, except that St. Aloysius died very, very young. And so I think he's a model certainly for young people, but he's a model for all of us, that wherever we are in our lives, we give ourselves totally to God. And sometimes that might require illness. Certainly we're living in an age where we know a lot of illness. We ourselves have been through some, and certainly our friends and our family, and so many people have suffered in a different kind of a plague, basically a pandemic. And so I think it's a beautiful way to remember, do we really pray for others who are suffering? Whether or not we can go out to them, such as St. Aloysius did, but do we take them into our hearts and do we pray for them? And that's an essential thing as being a Christian, a person who brings Christ to each other, to others, because he lives inside our own hearts. So, signing off from Cyber Sea of Galilee on this beautiful feast day, remain in the heart of Mary next to her Son.